Hi, it's us again. Still on holiday, not in the sunshine, but we've got a real fire, which we something we wouldn't have at home. And another thing that came with where we're staying, which is a rental cottage, is a copy of Lord of the Rings. Probably the most superbly well-read edition I've ever seen. So this was a film tie-in version, came out, I guess, at the beginning of the 2000s. And I think the either it was picked up second-hand or the family who own it have been reading the heckfire out of it for many decades.
You're so polite.
We've been reading it.
We have.
And we were reading it already, not this one, but
Well, when we say you were reading it, I was hearing it.
yeah, I've been reading it out loud to Jennie, and part of the reason, apart from that's like a thing to do, to fill in the empty hours, is that we realise we've both read the book like more than once, but not for a long time.
No.
Movies, on the other hand, we've seen many times, so the movies have kind of taken over our minds.
They have.
So we thought it'd be good to read it
themselves
and just to remember stuff that's in the book that isn't in the films and stuff that's different from the films, and just to enjoy what is the classic work of fantasy. Although I would say that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good novel.
True.
I think it's doing other things that aren't very novelistic.
Yeah.
And things, if you're expecting a sort of driving plot, for instance, you'll be, why are we bogged down with all this description? And
He was what he was, which was a scholar of, by he, I mean Tolkien.
Yeah.
A scholar of
He wrote the book.
ancient things, ancient English.
Well, language particularly.
Language,
Yeah.
Not a person who'd set out in life to write fiction. And he was inventing a genre that didn't exist. I mean, he'd got a background in myth and legend.
Sure, yeah.
And he's kind of using what he knows about the tropes of those things to put together this completely new thing.
So obviously we're revisiting it now, but I read this first when I was like 15.
Yeah.
1970s, when it was a big deal. At the time it seemed to fit in with a kind of hippie sort of, in the same sort of world as progressive rock albums and stuff like that. So I think my first reading was coloured by, I wasn't expecting an epic story. Certainly wasn't expecting fantasy. There was no such thing. I wasn't really expecting story. I was expecting some sort of cosmic, mind transcending experience. So things like in-depth descriptions of woods, walking through woods. At the time it was like, well, this is what it is, I suppose. So, and then the fact that you do get caught up in an epic story was almost like a bonus.
Yeah, I mean, I read it first when I was 14, which was 1969. And it was basically everybody in my class was reading it. They'd got it in the library at school. We had a great library at our school. It was brilliant. And it was like, have you read this? Have you read this? Everybody's reading this. And I read it as well. And I just thought it was brilliant. I'd read a lot of myths and legends and fairy stories from the library. Yeah. Including a lot of stuff by Roger Lansing Green. It was also one of the, I want to call them ink spots, but they weren't ink spots, the Inklings.
Oh, right,
the group that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and Roger Lansing Green used to meet.
A couple of others, the Eagle and Child,
the Bird and Babbitt.
Oxford, I mean, these are quite well-known things. We're not like coming at this as any kind of Tolkien scholars.
A bit's broken away.
Yeah, I won't. That's why I put the shield.
Of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had kind of that in my head, and things like Rosemary Sutcliffe historicals and stuff like that. So it seemed to kind of jigsaw puzzle itself into my brain around those two things. Whereas you'd got kind of M.R. James and Conan
I'm not sure I'd had. Yeah, I probably did have Conan the Barbarian.
Conan when you were like 7.
No, about the same time.
Dad used to read it.
About the same time, I might have read some M.R. James stories, and I think reading the first, we've read book 1, so Fellowship of the Ring, the first book, is divided into two parts. Really, we've read 12 chapters so far, and a lot of that to me now seems very much like horror. There's a lot of, you get the foreshadowing of like what this whole War of the Ring thing is, and the enemy rising in the east. So there's that kind of thing, but there's also, they're being pursued by the Black Riders, who are a lot more. This is the first difference I would cite with the movie. They're a lot more ambiguous in the book as what are they? It's like, oh, is that a pile of clothes and rubbish? Oh no, it's alive.
It's creeping towards me, sniffing.
Yeah, there's creeping. And, so it's got some of those sort of quiet horror tropes, and also the when they're. I should point out this is going to be full of spoilers, which probably doesn't matter for most people who've already read it. If you haven't read it, I'd say read it. It's an experience. It's part of culture. The old forest where there's a malign willow tree. So a couple of things I've read recently. Algernon Blackwood's famous story, The Willows, has scary willows in it. So that's something that Tolkien probably would have read. People think he had read that. Apparently he owned M.R. James books as well, so it's reasonable to assume he kind of knew that sort of stuff. But something I've read recently as well, The Ritual by Adam Neville, also has characters going through a wood with some of the same things happening, the way they get lost and misdirected and stuff like that. So I think you could see, so a lot of this first book, which is the same length as a normal novel, really, isn't it? As being a sort of horror story. But then you get, it isn't all like, oh my God, nature's terrifying. You then get Tom Bombadil.
No, Tom Bombadil, no.
So at this point, I'm just going to give you one of the songs of
Please
Tom Bombadil.
don't, I beg you.
So this, totally not in the movie section. He's almost like positive. You could see why hippies are like, yes, this guy really gets us. You've got this sort of crusty nature sprite kind of guy with his ring-a-dong-dillo pseudo folk songs.
Impossible to take seriously, particularly if, like me, when you were probably 16, you read Harvard Lampoon's Board of the Rings.
Right, so this is a satire.
Which is a satire on the books. Tom Bombadil character is Tim Benzedrine, and his fair lady Hashberry, and they're just stoners.
I see where they're coming
complete
from.
and utter stoners. And I so wish I hadn't got rid of that book.
Kind of a classic in its own way. They did a Dune one as well, apparently.
Did they? But yeah, it's one of those books that's funnier at the start than you get a bit bored with it. But Tom Bombadil, so glad they didn't put him in the film.
I mind him less than you do.
Yeah, you're very tolerant.
And I kind of see.
You're tolerant of idiocy.
See, I like the kind of going back to the very beginning when it's in Hobbiton and it's all quite homely and characters are called Mr., which makes it seem much more like a children's story. I kind of like all that, and obviously you get more of that. You see more places, you see more characters, you see things like a sort of hobbit mansion, like a hobbit stately home, you know, so what's that going to be like? So there's that sort of thing. And I think Tom Bombadil...
farm and a
yeah,
working
yeah,
farm.
there's a load more about the farm rather
yeah.
than just mentioning him. And so
Yeah.
you know, that's because it's like English countryside brought to life. And then you get the scary side of countryside, like the scary wood that might actually kill you.
Yeah.
But then that flips again, and now you've got Tom Bombadil as this kind of embodiment of nature. It's very strange.
Yeah.
But then it's back to scary stuff again with the Barrow.
Barrow Downs.
Fog on the Barrow Downs. You know, very again if you saw the menace that's described,
it would be terrifying.
Yeah, you'd have to be done well though.
If it was done well, yeah.
When it's in words and you've got to imagine it, it's a lot. To me, it's a lot scarier.
I found the Barrow Down stuff really scary because I'm claustrophobic, so there's that. But also, it's somewhere round about the same age. I can't remember the name of the book, but I read this kid's book. It was kind of a kid detective-y kind of thing. It certainly wasn't Enid Blyton. But there was a section in it where the children fleeing from the baddies actually go into a barrow that's being excavated, and they're like crawling along on their hands and knees through the passages of this.
So these are like burial chambers, basically.
Yeah.
So it's an underground grave made of stone, and the hobbits end up in there,
one.
about to be killed, really.
Sacrificed
by some,
isn't it?
Yeah.
By some white,
and then
Barrow white.
Then to add to that, as that sort of resolves, all of this stuff's got a history as well, and you're beginning to get this sense of like legends and backstory coming through. I think that's actually quite effective, even though it's got Tom Bombadil in it.
Yeah.
But you do get a lot of walking through the woods, and even I was beginning to tire of it, because I always say, oh, I'm here for the scenery.
You have a very low tolerance of walking through woods, don't you, dear?
No, I don't. No. I'm saying I like that, but it began to get just that this. I wish something else would happen other than walking through the woods and being wet and miserable, because it's like there's been an awful lot of that.
Yeah.
I think it works well, but it's a bit.
I'm thinking of
prolonged.
your antipathy to going to and fro over the earth.
Well, that seems to be what happens in lesser fantasy stories, especially when the authors lose really got anything to think to do. It's the characters going back and forth over the territory. But here, I think the territory is like the point.
Yes. Oh, God.
O'er stony mountains, cold and grey, through halls of iron and darkling door, and woods of nightshade morrowless, the sundering seas between them lay, and at last they met once more, and long ago they passed away in the forest singing sorrowless. Hello again. So, turns out memory cards don't have infinite capacity. So, what is this, one of Sauron's tricks? Anyway, switch to phone, I hope. So, back to talking about The Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings.
I can't quite remember what we were talking about, really. There's some odd little things that jumped out.
We just got past Barrow Down.
Right, yeah. I was thinking, no particular order. I was thinking of things that are like when the Tolkien uses the metaphor of an express train.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Does that mean they have trains in Middle Earth?
It just means they have bad editors.
And then there's a fox walks past and thinks something about the hobbits. Like, so foxes are sentient in Middle Earth? Obviously, probably a lot of ink gets spilled on thinking about things like that, which you can not think about.
I kind of remember assuming that the foxes that all the animals were sort of partially sentient, just because it wasn't